I mean, I grew up watching Sam Leach and the likes, and Match of the Day in the black and white days.
Sure. So did I.
Footy was better in those days, wasn't it?
Footy was different. I don't think it was better.
Oh, come on.
No, I think my view is it was different. You know, I don't think the game is a fantastic sport, and it, like every other walk of life, television included, it goes through generational changes, and I think there was obviously less of it on television then, which made everything seem probably a little bit more, from this distance, a little bit more romantic. I'm not sure it was. I'm sure people who watch it, young people who watch football now, will in 30 years' time be romanticising about people of this time. So,
do you think in the same degree as Law, Best, Charlton, Greavesy, do you think people will be talking about foreign footballers that?
I think very, very, very probably. I mean, I just think that was my era,
yeah.
And I remember second year of Match of the Day, there were two great games. Tottenham 5, Manchester United 1. Manchester United 5, Tottenham 1. And in it was a great Jimmy Greaves goal where he dribbled, and they always showed it. It became part of the grandstand titles, actually. And two absolute blooters from Bobby Charm from about 30 yards, which he wasn't entitled to score, but of course he did.
What are your most memorable moments personally working on Match of the Day? Or
well, I would say on Match of the Day, it was. I suppose one of my favourite moments was I was actually allocated a game to edit, which was one of those big things. You know, you'd actually. And I was given the third match to edit on the basis it would be the poorest game, and therefore it would be on last. Therefore, there wouldn't be much of it, and it wouldn't be on till 10 to 12. Well, the two other games were 0-0. And mine, Bolton 0, Brighton 2, became the main match. And the only reason it got on the air was I had a brilliant videotape editor called Neddy Hughes, who wasn't interested in sport, but was interested in videotape editing. And I did the tea run, really, while he got it ready. But it got on the air, and then at the end of that season, unbeknown to me, the last edition of the series was the first time I saw my credit on the television. Which is like for non-television people, there's a bit of a so what. For television people.
But in days when the credits you could actually read and were there for a length of time.
They were for a length of time, and of course the trick in those days was either to be at the very top of them or the very bottom of them. And I didn't get to the very top of them, but I did get to the very bottom of them, yeah. I'll always be, I think, a fan of professional journalist broadcaster first, but then you get somebody like Gary Lineker who's come along and trained himself really well. I also think, by the way, there's a lot asked of former sports people who drop into television. Almost their stardom in one field is deemed to qualify them for a stardom in another, and it doesn't necessarily follow. Certainly I brought Gary Lineker into television, and I brought Alan Hansen into television. Both of them had a reasonable career of it. I spent a lot of time with both of them trying to make them understand what television was about, and making sure that they knew when they'd done a great show, making sure they knew when they'd done an average show, making sure when it hadn't quite worked, explain why it hadn't worked. Because, quite frankly, why should they know about they know about the subject matter within the broadcast, but how to actually disseminate that in a really professional way is difficult.
Yeah. I remember Gary's first show.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time with Gary, and it worked really well.
How did it all become so bland?
That's your view again, isn't it?
It is. And the view of many.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that if you look at something like Monday Night Football.
Match of the Day became bland. Come on. They became safe. They looked like they were safe. They're all cosy, you know.
Once again, you're expressing your own view.
And it's not,
once again, you're expressing your own view, which you're totally entitled to. I think they have less time. You know, the real stars of that show are the match edits. That's the real. They're the real stars of it. The punditry around it is an important ingredient, but I've never believed And it's the stuff that makes more of the headlines and more of the news. The reality was the stars of the shows in Match of the Day, in the format it's done, is the action anyway. And I don't believe, by the way, that there's more than one way of actually analysing the football match. And a lot of the time, these guys are analysing it in 2.5 minutes, not half an hour at the end of the game.
Could we not have a show where there's no punditry, no analysis?
You could, yeah, you could. Of course, you could.
I mean,
no, of course you could.
I fast forward through them.
Well, yeah, but you know, once again, that's your.
No, I'm just thinking. Let's go back to the old days. Let's have at the most a link man, link into the footage, link into the break, whatever.
Well,
at the most, or let's just have a show where the action is shown.
It's called live. It's called live football.
Can we see more of the football?
It's called live football, actually.
Des Lynam.
Yeah.
A giant.
Iconic, in my view, because of his time. I worked with some of the BBC guys. David Coleman I worked with. Yeah. Urgent. Tough newsman.
Not the easiest person to work with from all accounts.
But brilliant. You know, you ride with that because you're working with somebody who's brilliant. I think Des came around just at the right time following the likes of David, because he had a softer approach, he had a great dry wit, a lot of charm, but he knew a news story when he saw it, and he could deliver a killer opening line and a killer closing line. So, and I did thousands of hours with him. The other thing is, we had great fun doing it. You know, we had great.
And that comes across in any TV show.
Sure, it does. I think teamwork and.
Did women watch football before Des Lynam? I'm trying to remember.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did.
Did Pavarotti ever thank you for reigniting
I think
his
he
career?
did actually see Des. Des went out to interview him, so I do think I've never met. I obviously won't now, but I never met Pavarotti. Des did, because in the last week of Italia '90, this thing was flying off the shelf to such a degree.
Nessun Dorma. We're talking about
Nessun Dorma. That
your idea or somebody else's?
No, I claim part ownership of that idea. I really genuinely do. I can remember the moment I played the record at home. I knew as well, you know, the first time I knew it would have a real chance was when the milkman was delivering the milk and he was whistling it, and he hit the note at the end, which is a word that none of us quite, well, I'm sure the people who really know this stuff know. Everybody had a go at hitting this note and saying whatever word, and the milkman did. And I went into Des and said, we're onto something here, you know. And, you know, it was... the reason I'm really proud of it is it did more than just open a television show. It sort of opened classical music out for a brief time. I'm not claiming that, you know, we opened the nation, but it gave people... Suddenly, I had the best of Pavarotti in my... LP collection, whereas I wouldn't have had it for any reason, you know.
No, I think Classic FM was...
all of that is a bit of a spin-off.
It's not your ringtone now then, Nessun Dorma?
No, it isn't.
Do you know the words? Do you know them in English? Can you translate? Can you
I only know that none shall sleep is what it means, but... and nobody slept during that Italian 90, it was absolutely belting stuff. I think you get the best person for the job. When I brought him across to ITV, he was 58. You've got to remember, in some categorisations of television, age and the wisdom with a small W that comes with that, and the experience that genuinely comes with that, is an absolute asset. So,
yes. You can't run a sports channel full of bimbos who are 21 or something.
I don't know one that's on the air, put it down.
What a diplomat this is. Commentators, come on in, hands up, vote, get off the fence. Who was your favourite over all the years?
I think we, in my time at the BBC, we were absolutely blessed with having two, in Motson and Davis, who were top of the class. There were three great commentators at that era. Two of them were on the BBC, and one was on ITV. Brian Moore had a fantastic voice. You know, started on radio, developed his craft there, and a fantastic voice. On BBC we had a different problem. We had that lovely problem, who would you select? Because Motson and Davis were top-class commentators with very different styles. I used to say that, you know, there was a civil war between them, and it was quite civil. And I described Motson as the roundhead, and Barry as the Cavalier, I think they had he had a flourish to the way he did his commentary. He did other sports as well, which gave him, I think in his view, a breadth. Motti was very locked into football. What you knew was both of them were absolutely top class. What has changed is the number of commentators and the number of games. Then the live stuff was probably a big tournament at the end of the season. So something like Match of the Day was built on people like Motson and Davis. So I always had no problem in saying that I wasn't blessed with one great commentator, I was blessed with two. You couldn't each give them a half. You know, one had to do it or the other had to do it. And I think what I'd like to think about my period in charge of that really highly significant part of BBC's football era is I was fair, and you know, Motti had done every cup finals for a long time, but he didn't do two in my era because I decided it was Barry's opportunity.
Do you ever see that happening? Do you ever see us going back to as it was in your heyday, my heyday?
No, I don't. I think football, live sport, live event television is fundamental to the welfare of broadcasting, and football's the top of the pile. I just think, I've always said, I think there's two types of rights, you know, football and the rest, and the best of football is at the best of the top of those rights. Live television is the thing that really triggers big audiences. And also, even if you look at it in a light entertainment perspective, X Factor and Strictly Come Dancing, we both worked in television a long time ago. The theory you do a light entertainment show of that scale, live, every week, you couldn't, you know, people used to record the Christmas shows in August, you know what I mean? These are, so everybody has recognised, I think, live is best in terms of big event television, and football in terms of sport is way out there, yeah.